Live now, we can start.
Good evening, everyone, and I welcome you all to today's session. I, Namrata Patkiri, shall be the host today evening. I welcome you all again to today's webinar session on Anajuri, on community health with Anajuri. So, moving forward, I would like to brief you all a bit about what Anajuri is. So, Anajuri, as the name suggests, in simple words, it means the bond of love. Milindatta is the founder of Anajuri, and it is his love for his native land that brought him back from the USA to Assam in order to start this non profitable organization that engages and promotes various initiatives such as striving for social change, leadership qualities and skills, and building entrepreneurship capabilities among the people living in Northeast India. For a couple of months now, we have been interacting with speakers from different regions via virtual media uh, on very relevant topics that are significant in today's generation. So, moving towards today's reason why we have gathered here today, I would like to welcome today's guest. Her name is Brinda Baruah Sharma, and today's topic is creating hope through action. Brinda Baruah ma'am is a licensed clinical psychologist by profession, and she serves at her center, Arunet. She is also serving as child psychologist for pediatrics at Assam Medical College, Dibrugarh, with an experience of more than 15 years in the field of psychology. She also contributes to the field of mental health by taking up training and research activities. Once again, I welcome you, ma'am. So, I would like you to take over the screen. Please, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, Namrata, for the warm. It's a very relevant topic that you have asked me to speak on, which is creating hope through action. This is in line with the triennial theme, which was adapted for the year 2021 till 2003 on the World Suicide Prevention Day, which is celebrated each year on the 10th of September. Now, we all know that suicide has been increasing worldwide, and almost 7 lakhs people worldwide die by suicide. And with every death that there are almost 135 people who get affected by the intense grief for every death, which means that there's millions of people around the world who are suffering this problem. Now, this problem is a very complex one. It's something which is multifactorial, multidimensional, and at the same time, there's no linear progression. We cannot say that suicide has, I thought about suicide, whether I've been about it for a long time, whether I've planned it. So there's no linear progression. We cannot say that a person is suicidal because of so and so reasons. So we need to create a lot of awareness, and that is why this theme has been created. Now, this focuses on how each one of us can play a role, and the smallest awareness that we have, the smallest and the kindest word, a little action from our side can help us to prevent this intense problem. Crisis problem. This is a crisis, actually, community crisis. So we need to know here that when you asked me to talk about this, I was hoping that we could now take this opportunity to create or empower people who are listening to us by making each one of us a gatekeeper to suicide prevention, where all of us, we can be aware not only about what suicide looks like, what it is, and what are the different variations, what are the risk factors, but also in a more, more systematic manner. So when we talk about suicide, we have to first, before we really talk about it or we try to dissect it and understand it, we need to talk about whether we are ready, all of us. What do we do when we see crisis, when we ourselves is in crisis? So what happens is we have to take an introspective role first. We have to introspect about our beliefs, our attitudes and past stories, because all of us, we have narratives. And whenever we hear the narratives of others or we perceive others, we have a tendency that own past narratives, our own past pain, our stories, our beliefs and attitudes, they get reflected in the way we are responding or reacting to that particular narrative that we are seeing around us. Now, if we really want to be gatekeepers, we have to reflect on our responses and reactions. It is very important for us to know, until and unless we know what triggers us, whether because we get triggered by what we think is right or wrong. We get triggered by how people should behave in particular situations. And when we don't see that around us, we might behave in two ways, which can be detrimental to what we are trying to achieve today. The first thing is, if we want to be a crisis responder, we first have to understand our reactions so that we don't we should not minimize the situation that the other person is going through or we ourselves we are going through. Many a times we keep our brave front. We do not understand what's going on inside us. And when we see such narratives in others, we try to minimize it by saying that just take a walk, you'll feel better. Why don't you play? Why don't you listen to music? Or why don't you, focus on something that will actively. So when we do that, when we minimize that, or when we become very adversarial to it, like we try to control it, like if a parent listens to a child who is suicidal, or someone who's threatening suicide, or someone who has engaged in non-suicidal self-injurious behavior, hurting herself or himself, the parent might want to control, not aware. So we might want to control. We might say that if you do this again, we are going to withhold all our, we will not give you the pocket money, or we will not allow you to go out, or you don't need to go anywhere. You don't need to see anybody. So those kind of things can lead us to minimize the importance of this particular, the crisis that is happening within the family. So we all have to know that suicide happens in families, and every family member, every community member is a gatekeeper. We can all educate ourselves so that we can be gatekeepers to this particular crisis. Apathetic to it, being withdrawn to it, or even if we start blaming others by saying that this is just being done because of some attention that they are seeking. So these are things that we might miss the suicidal ideation that the person is currently having. So it's important that we analyze our responses, our reactions, so that we can give proper, educated or informed responses whenever we see crisis around us. Now, let us try and understand what are the, there are definitions of self-injurious behavior. One such definition is, there are, self-directed violence. These are all self-directed violence. Now, suicidal self-directed violence can be fatal or non-fatal. Fatal, like we say, that it's a planned lethal means have been adopted and this completed suicide. Now, non-fatal might be suicidal self-directed violence with or without injury. Now, if such an attempt is interrupted by others, or if it is interrupted by ourselves, okay, that can be a non-fatal suicidal self-directed violence. Also, many a time, such non-suicidal self-directed violence can be preparatory in nature, where we try to increase our threshold of pain by, cutting ourselves. And then we might also be, practicing or rehearsing such situations where we would want to see how we can adopt the means and then how we can complete the suicide. Now, that is something that can be that we also need to know that it can be both fatal and non-fatal. Now, what do we usually do whenever there are non-fatal self-directed violence? What we do is that we need to understand our responses. That is why family, as an individual, or as community, we cannot triggered by the action that the person has taken. And instead, we can create a safety plan for that person. And we can create that plan and help the person to identify what he or she is going through, so that we can either address the crisis by ourselves, or we can make appropriate referrals so that they can get help. Now, understanding this of suicide, there are certain common factors across all suicides. There are certain factors, such as the first factor is the common purpose of suicide. So what is the common purpose? If we try to understand that, the common purpose is to seek a solution. So what kind of solution are we seeking? We are seeking a solution wherein that anguish that we are in, the intense emotional distress, we want a solution to that particular problem. There is a common goal, which is the cessation of consciousness. We don't want to be aware. We feel that there is a continuation of the suffering, or there is the end of consciousness. So because that happens, we experience a lot of psych ache or emotional pain. A lot of emotional pain that is totally intolerable, unbearable, or inescapable. So understanding that if we are talking to someone, even if we are not talking to someone, we are seeing people who are in different situations in life where they are being, they are perceiving crisis. Then at that time, does the person feel in control, or does he feel that no, there's no solution to it? So the common stressor, what kind of stressor can push us towards this psychological pain? Stressor, which tells us about frustrated psychological needs. So if our psychological needs, which are different for different people, it might seem very, trivial for us that someone is thinking about this, thinking about ending their lives for some reason. But still, we might, that person may have a psychological need which we are unable to understand. So whenever the psychological needs are frustrated, that might be the common stressor. That is mostly the common stressor. The common emotion that they experience is helplessness, hopelessness. They feel hope. And, the most interesting thing about the experience of suicide is that many people who have attempted suicide and who come for therapy, they talk a lot about the cognitive state of ambivalence, that though they want to end their life, they also want to be saved. So it is only because of the tunnel vision, it is only because they feel that there's no way out of this particular distress, they start thinking in a very constricted manner. So there's only two possibilities, black and white. Black when we are continuing with the suffering, and white, which is death or the end of consciousness. So the most common interpersonal act that we have to look out for is the communication of intent, that I want to die, or I have been thinking about death. Now, what also we need to understand is that though 25% of people who have just had, within 5 minutes of having a thought of suicide, may try, fatal ways of committing suicide, yet there are many who have been suffering for a long time, not just because of the situation or the crisis situation that has triggered the idea of suicide, but lifelong patterns of coping, lifelong patterns of substance use, lifelong patterns of unhealthy coping strategies, escapism, a very strong need for control. These can also give us some understanding that, okay, this particular person in my family or in my neighborhood or in my class may have a vulnerability if frustrated. Okay, so these are things that we can be aware of. Now, in the Indian context, there are certain, not only in the Indian context, I'll talk about the Indian context later, but there are certain underlying risk factors. So some of the risk factors might be psychosocial in nature, like there will be lack of social support, unemployed people, if there is, um, um, history of abuse or trauma in the person, family history of mental illness, family history of death by suicide. These can be psychosocial risk factors that we have to be aware of. There might be psychiatric risk factors. 50% of people, only 50% of people may have comorbid psychiatric condition. So there might be anxiety and depression, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. So these are substance use, of course. These are some disorders where there might be an increase in suicide rates. There might be physical illness if they are coping with lifelong chronic pain, chronic illnesses, if that is affecting their movement, if that is affecting their quality of life for a long time. Also, certain demographic factors like though in women they try or attempt suicide more, completed suicides are more in male. So if particularly if they are widowed, if there is a divorce in the household, or if there's no social support at all, okay, or perceived loss of reputation. So these are or social status or economic crisis. They might, like we already spoke about, in psychological risk factors that might be very heightened. A lot of psychological pain, anxiety, or lowered like increase in psychological turmoil. Also perfectionism. Now that is something which is very common in all of us. In fact, in our Indian society, we try to imbibe perfection in our children. But imbibing perfection in the children, or criticizing them, a lot of expressed emotions where we are overcritical, over-involved, or overprotective about our child, very hostile towards the child. These might again make perfectionism that can also be a risk factor for increased suicide. There might be behavioral factors as well, like impulse aggression, severe anxiety, panic attacks, and prior attempts. Like if there is a history of prior attempt of suicide, it makes you more vulnerable for a completed suicide later on. In the also, like I said, neglect and trauma, these can be risk factors. We have already covered a lot about these, I think, individual and social levels, but at the same time, the contextual or life environment, like we are so engrossed in our own life narratives that many a times the stories that are happening around us, we might miss that our best friend might also be going through a lot of coping, or our brother is probably preparing for entrances and he's going through a lot of emotional and psychological trauma or turmoil. So we might miss the little stories which are not they're not standing out, but these stories really matter, the kind of life events that people are going through, and the kinds of perception they have about this particular situation, whether they think they are capable of having control over the situation, or whether they think that they have no control over the situation. So that makes us vulnerable, that if we feel that we have low self-efficacy, like if we feel that we don't have the capacity to perform the critical behaviors that will take us out of the problem, or if we feel that this is destiny, this is luck, this is something which only others can give me, that can also lead to, that creates a vulnerability for suicide as well. So what are the warning indicators? What are the behavioral signs that might lead to suicidal, that can tell us that, okay, the person might be suicidal? One is talking about suicide, of course, mentioning death, mentioning about dying, Yeah. And if it's coming up too often in the talks, or if there's a substantial increase in alcohol use, in drug use, in substance use, isolating oneself within the household, keeping to the room, not having shared spaces with family members, like not having dinner together, lunch together, or if there's a lot of, social withdrawal, not going out with others or friends, if there is acting recklessly or impulsively, if there's a lot of impulsivity, risk-taking behavior, giving away of prized possessions, like you might give away your trophy, you might give away your medal, okay, or you might give away something that's very precious to you, something very personal and precious to you. Not addressing your physical needs, not addressing the physical appearance, yeah, that can also be a behavioral warning sign. Aggression, fighting, getting into trouble with others, with sleeping too much or too little. Like if the biological functions are affected, if you're sleeping too much, if you're sleeping too little, if the appetite is lowered, or if you're eating a lot, in this, these can be behavioral warning signs. Putting affairs in order, and also unexplained crying. So if you're crying, if you're tearful without any reason, that can be also a behavioral warning sign. There are also some protective factors, some factors which also protect us. One is, of course, a positive sense of self. So there are people around us who have stories where there's a lot of chaos, there's a lot of difficulty. But if we know that person to have a positive sense of self, then that can create a protection against suicide. There might be a sense of, like I said, the self-efficacy, whether I can control it. Okay, that again is a important protective factor. Good coping skills. So they do not take the route of escapism, where they are not using substances or alcohol or procrastination or increased screen time or increased sleepiness to escape a situation. That can also be a protective factor at the individual level. Good physical health, then family harmony at the social level, of course, emotional security, physical security, social security, supportive social relationship, and good communication skills. That's a very important factor, protective factor. Many a times in our society, talking about suicide or our emotions might be taken up as a signal or a sign of weakness. Okay, so again, we can talk a lot about achievements, but very few of us can actually talk about our vulnerabilities very openly. So that is again something that can, if we have good communication skills, if we are able to express ourselves better, that can be a protective factor. If there's a healthy family environment, there's no dysfunctionality, there's no history of prior suicide attempts in the family or in the person, or like very sound mental health, sound social health, social standing within the family, that can be a protective factor. Within the life environment, I think one of the important factors is employment, being employed, having a sense of purpose, having a sense can also be protective factors. Now, if we want to lend our support to people at risk of suicide, there are certain do's and don'ts. One thing that we have to remember not to do is that we should not think that we can, quicken the process or plant the seed or thought of suicide by just asking about it. So we have to talk more about it. The more we ask if someone is thinking about suicide or about death, the better chances are that they will be more comfortable to share their experiences. Okay, so we also do not need to give special, we should not think that people who are suicidal are also special. That will take away their sense of agency. So we have to empower them, listen to them, but we cannot enable them. So one of the don't is not to assume responsibility about taking away all the problems in the person's life. Okay, so we are there to listen, we are there to support, but we have to instill the sense of agency in the person. One of the don't is not to discuss about, in an abstract way about death, or, share our own views about death, dying, reincarnation, what good life is, what suicide is, how it is. We should not delegitimize it, which means that we cannot criminalize the act of suicide. And we cannot, one should not give any kind of cheap general reassurance like sab theek ho jaba, or everything will be fine at the end of the day. You just need to be patient. Okay, and some of the do's is coming up with a safety plan. One of the most important thing that we need to do is coming up with a safety plan. Now, what is a safety plan? That's a very interesting thing that we as therapists and clinical psychologists or counselors and psychologists do, which all gatekeepers should also know. One thing is that once we ask the question, are you thinking about suicide? We have to start talking and engage in a dialogue. Keeps taking us forward, okay? Which means that we never leave the discussion or that day. We don't end the day with just a reassurance that, okay, I'll be fine. You don't worry about me. I'll not end my life. We should end the discussion with another date to meet. Okay, so when are we going to meet next? So one of the do's is to talk about the safety plan and to have another day where we can discuss about, carry forward the thoughts. So following through with the discussion or the dialogue that we have initiated with the person. The second is to remove the opportunities. So we have to remove all the opportunities that the person might have. So which means that maybe allowing the person to stay with someone, someone who can keep the person safe. Yeah. So removing the opportunities where we can check his room, their room, and then see whether they have kept something hidden. Yeah. So any means that they might be using. We cannot intrude while they are talking. So when they are sharing their thoughts and emotions, the best thing that we can do is listen. And when we are listening, to know, like when we are asking, we have to listen. So listening without intruding is another do. We have to prevent and involve, which means that maybe after the first question was, what was the first question is, are you thinking about death? Are you thinking about dying? Or like, what do you experience when you think about dying? So we can talk about that a little, and then we can ask how we can help them. They might say that, no, you cannot help me. So who can? So let us bring in others in the safety plan, where we talk about who are the people they can reach out to. They say, oh, my mother, I'm very close to my mother. I think she can help. She can help. She's the only one who eases me or makes me feel good. Then that is the moment when we take their number. We ask if we can call them now, and we have a talk with them as well, then and there, in front of the person who's suicidal, who are having these thoughts. So we talk to them and we say that they might call you. So please make yourself available. And how we can rope in many people like them. Okay, so it's not just about the family, friends, even places that make them feel better. So what are the activities that make them feel better? If it's a cup of coffee sitting by the garden or in the terrace, wherever it is. So we keep the person aware that these are the available options, and just staying with the feeling of distress, awareness of distress is not, these are not the only two options. There are other alternatives to your situation. So that is something we have to do. Also giving them the, appropriate referral, which means helpline numbers can also be useful here. So we have Haroti, which is 104. We can call that number where they can talk about the Assam government's number, where they can talk about their thoughts in anonymous way or in a non-judgmental manner. 14416 is also there's another Telemanas. Telemanas is 14416, which is the national helpline number. So they can call there as well. There's another number, Amiyasu. I'll have to check the number. I'll let you know, of course. Amiyasu is the Department of Psychiatry, Assam Medical College helpline number, where they can call and talk. So these are the numbers which are readily available to them. And in the safety plan, each one of us, if we can give them these numbers, so that can also create hope in the person. Yeah, so that no matter what time it is, no matter how bad they are feeling, they can still talk to someone, and still there's someone who will listen to them. So apart from this, connecting with the local mental health professionals who can make a difference here, like if there's a clinical psychologist, if there's a psychiatrist or counselors, in schools and hospitals and colleges, we have counselors. So they can reach out and talk to them as well. So we can share their numbers. And for that, we have to inform ourselves. And we have to keep those informations not only for others, to help others, but also for our own safety and need. We have to make the environment safe. So, which means that if there are suicidal ideations, we cannot just let it stay. We have to make sure that the person is with someone, and they have to monitor very actively. And also we have to remove the means. So a safety sweep of the entire house or the entire room is a must. Okay, so we can do that. So okay, let's talk about so the suicide module of WHO. The suicide module of WHO, the first step towards preventing suicide is to ask, according to this module, there are 5 questions that they have outlined. Okay, the first question is, have you ever attempted suicide? The second is, are you feeling hopeless? Third, have you had any recent thoughts of death and dying? Fourth, when was the last time you felt this way or you attempted suicide? And fifth is, what is likely to make you think about suicide? So what are the stressors that you think push you towards these thoughts? So suicide threats they are the warning signs. And the idea to the action. Okay. Ideas, it can be like, it's quite common. It's very common that there might be suicidal ideas in the minds of people who are undergoing stressors, and especially those with impulsivity, with poor coping skills, with poor emotional regulation. Yeah. What actually takes suicide from being an idea is act of completion. The first thing is, of course, when we perceive the situation as a no solution, there's no other solution to it. Yeah, so there's this intense sense of helplessness. Also, if that sense of helplessness, that suicidal ideation if it is passive, it's okay. How is it okay? That it might keep on fluctuating and we might not feel obsessively have that thought. But it might be active as well, where obsessively we are thinking about death and dying as the only solution to our impossible problem. There might be, if the person has a plan in the mind. So if someone in the course of our dialogue, we come to know that this person has been thinking about the method of how they are going to commit suicide, or what is the lethality of the means that they are thinking about, whether this means is accessible to them or not, or when, where, who are the witnesses, if they are thinking about the entire scenario, that again can be a part of the plan. And we need to talk about that plan as well. If there is any kind of preparation, like writing a will, if there's writing a suicide note, tidying up affairs so that we can go to the next step. If the means have been procured, if we have secured guns or ammunitions or tablets, anything, pesticides, okay, then if we are rehearsing, if there's trying to create by hurting ourselves consciously, okay, so these can take suicide from being just an idea to the act of completion. So whenever we are talking about suicide, we have the safety plan that all of us can do. And then we also need to do a risk assessment, which usually a mental health professional can take up. A risk, we analyze the intent, whether it's mild, moderate, severe intent, the lethality as well, how persistent, how obsessive it is, okay, and that can help us to understand whether the predictors of immediate risk, which is the method, the means, the time and place, lethality, etc., they can create a low risk of suicide, high risk of suicide, or a moderate risk of suicide. Now, suppose it's a low risk of suicide, still can be helpful because it is their cry for help. There are many who engage in non-suicidal self-injurious behavior. It's very common. It's very common because we are trying to address our distress by creating pain. Sometimes it becomes a habit, sometimes to escape the pain because it gives us the relief. Also, many a times it can be a choice. So we need, whenever we are meeting people with non-suicidal self-injurious behavior, we have to talk a lot about their coping skills, their social environment, their family environment, and also the emotional regulation. So it is important that while we are doing this, while we are talking about this, or we are discussing this important community health crisis, we have to know that in spite of all our efforts, we might still have death by suicide around us. Yeah, that doesn't mean that we become hopeless and helpless ourselves, but we should continue with our journey to create awareness, remove the stigma about which is associated with talking about suicide. Many a times, men do not come forward. Very educated people, they do not come forward. They are people who are the head of the families, people who are in authority positions in families. They don't come forward because they feel that, okay, me talking about it would be stigmatized. Yeah. So it is important for us to know that breaking the barrier, creating dialogues, creating channels where we can talk about these narratives, the lived experience of, surviving suicides, like people who have lost their close ones to suicide. So even suicide survivors, they can help us to gain more insight about the entire scenario. So, and like I said, it's a multi-sectorial, right? Creating hope through action focuses on a multi-sectorial approach. It's not limited to the mental health professionals. It's not limited to the teachers or the ones who are in the healthcare. This is for all of us. We have to create hope through action and small steps, small actions which are sustainable, which can break the barriers, can help us to address this crisis. I think I've come to the end of my talk. If there are any questions, I'll take.
Ma'am, as you were talking about hopelessness, so ma'am, if this hopelessness is prolonged, it may lead to such suicidal thoughts, or one may commit suicide. So, ma'am, apart from this, when we talk about some temporary hopelessness or some burnouts which we usually go through, it's temporary, right? So, ma'am, could these also lead to suicidal thoughts, or it's
Of
just our
course, like I said, suicidal ideations.
it's just our
Suicidal
manifestation?
ideations.
Yes,
Yeah, tell
ma'am.
me. Sorry, please complete your question.
Since yes, ma'am. So I was saying that since we are thinking of this on a daily basis, that uh, this maybe can lead to suicide or something like that. But it can also be a temporary thing, or it can also be a burnout. So, ma'am, in that case, if the person is thinking that I am suicidal, so does it really mean that he or she is actually going to commit it, or it's just a temporary thought?
Like I said, that is why the risk assessment is important. If the person thinks I'm suicidal, and if it is an active thought, not a passive one, which means that it's not fluctuating, it's there in the mind for quite some time. Okay. If there is like I said, the protective factors are not there and the risk factors are high, if the vulnerability is created, then of course, like I said, almost 25% of people who have just had the thought of dying may attempt in a fatal manner. Okay. So prolonged hopelessness. Remember, hopelessness is a very strong indicator of depression in a person. If it is chronic, if it is prolonged, and I have been like, it's been years since I've felt hopeless, then probably there's an underlying depressive disorder. It might be the less severe form of depression, which is known as dysthymia, which is, prolonged. So even that can create a vulnerability. So if we dismiss this as just a temporary thing, then we can dismiss it, but only if we have sought some kind of professional advice. We can be dismissive. We do not need to be on high alert all the time. Yeah, but at the same time, if we observe that I've been hopeless, observe that she has been hopeless for a long time, but it's very mild. Okay, still it's important that we go for counseling or we go for therapy, if not medication. Of course, if medication is needed, you will be referred for that. But talking to someone who can guide you, who can assess it, yeah, and maybe discuss hopelessness doesn't come in, that can be helpful. Yeah.
So, as you said, we can approach some medical counselors, such. So, ma'am, how far do you think that these organizations you were recently talking about, like before? So, ma'am, how far these organizations are fruitful in this? Like,
Of course, it's very helpful because time, there has to be a gap between the intent and the time and the attempt. Intent and attempt, we need to broaden the time, the gap. Yes. So when you're calling Telemanas, when you're calling Saroti, when you're calling Amiyasu, and you're talking to them for 5 minutes, the gap is already created between the intent and the act. Yeah, that is number one. Number two, the fact that when you talk about it, you realize that you want to escape. So the ambivalence is addressed. The ambivalence is also addressed. Third, are trained professionals. So they listen to it. So they listen to you. And when you listen, when you're being heard,
What has happened? Is there anyone in the meeting right now?
Yes, yes, I'm there. Don't worry.
So sorry, I got disconnected.
Okay, ma'am, it's okay, fine.
Yeah, so I was talking about how suicidal states are time limited. The intent to die comes and goes. Okay. So ideation comes and goes. Ambivalence is almost always there. The fact that we are talking to these helpline numbers to these people, the ambivalence is, it gets exaggerated, it gets inflated. And creating ambivalence means that I don't want to die now. Okay? So that is a message that the person can get.
Ma'am, then could you put some more insights on how education system acts as an impetus to suicide?
Education system, like if you're talking about the negative way, then I'd like to tell you that among the northeast states, Tripura, Assam has high rates and Sikkim has the highest rate of suicide. Now that happens because it was found out that high education in these areas, okay, there's more educated people among them, and the intervening variable is expectation. So with high expectations, many of the things that are again some problems. Okay, so I was saying that the intervening variable is expectation. So many of the thoughts that are there in the mind of the suicidal, one of that is perfectionism, rumination, rigidity. Now these are things that can accompany high expectations. So with education comes a lot of baggage as well. But this is in the negative light. But what we are doing now, your attempts, the platform that you are creating, this platform for Enajori, we are trying to also educate about or inform about suicide. So it's in both ways. We have gatekeeper courses as well in Arunit Center only for just a minimum, registration fee of 100. We actually organize a lot of gatekeeper courses where we have a structured way of understanding about suicide, how to intervene suicide, and at the same time, you get educated about it. So you get an e-certificate after it. That can, I think, such courses, these dialogues that you're having, some behavioral rehearsals or role plays that we can have in classrooms as well, where we try and understand how to put the safety plan in place. So education, yes, of course, has a lot of role.
Ma'am, then you also talked about some myths and stigmas related to mental health. So, ma'am, how
Yes.
affect the individuals who contemplate suicide?
Of course, like contemplating about suicide, as I keep on telling you, that contemplating about suicide itself means that we have to ascertain the risk. Okay, there are certain myths which tell us that thinking about suicide means that I am suicidal. Okay, so suicidal wishes or ideations can range from active suicidal intent to just, milder forms of death wish, where you feel like I shouldn't have woken up this morning. Okay. Also, the myth which surrounds the dialogue around suicide, that whether we should talk about suicide or not. Now, that is something that we have to remove that myth altogether. We have to address it. That yes, ask about suicide, talk about suicide. We as healthcare professionals, we had difficulty when a patient a person who comes in, suppose someone who has been diagnosed with anxiety and depression, asking that very person about suicide was difficult for us, but we have been trained where asking that question is a must now. But initially, when we were trainees and we were asked to talk about it, we would be very apprehensive about it because we would feel that what if the person becomes suicidal? So that myth is one important myth that we need to address.
Okay, ma'am. Last question. Ma'am, when we talk about assisted suicide, or what we term it as euthanasia, so ma'am, in that case, many people think that it is sort of legal or ethical as well, because they think that by doing this, it's a positive death, because it's in a way helps that particular person
preserve
to
the human dignity.
Yeah. And how can this impact the discussions on hope and action?
Euthanasia.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. See, it's a very debated topic right now, because there are many who talk about the pros of euthanasia because it preserves human dignity, it relieves pain and suffering, and is a form of many feel that it should be legalized. But in a country like India, there are different factors that might affect euthanasia being legalized, because we live in a very collectivist society. We hold on to hope, we hold on to the last thread of hope as well. So the very notion of being an Indian is collectivism to a great extent. Yes. So when we talk about that, assisting someone with the process of death or into the process of dying is something that might be morally and ethically unacceptable to many people. Yes. So because of this duality in the discussion, because there is this ethical principle, this collectivist notion. So what people are saying is that instead of assisting the person to die, why don't we assist the person to be relieved of the pain and suffering? Yes. So till the time we have those means with us, till the time we have those means where we are preserving the human dignity through efforts to relieve pain, relieve suffering, and maintain the quality of life. Okay, maintain that semblance of selfhood in the person. So I think it's a very debatable question. I think we can have an entire session on this, but at the same time, knowing that these two aspects are there, of course, to see our loved ones suffer, yeah, that is also extremely painful. But there are many families who are willing to go through that pain just to keep the person with them. Yeah, so there are multiple, I think, psychosocial factors which are involved in this particular thing.
So, ma'am, these shall be the questions from my side. So, ma'am, as we are time bound, So we would like to conclude this session for today. And it's an honor to have you, ma'am, as a guest today. We
Thank
hope that
you.
we can have further such discussions on these topics with you as well. So, ma'am, thank you for
Sure,
joining us
sure,
today.
sure. Thank you so
To
much.
meet again. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you.